In this video, we're going to talk about general obligation bonds, which are a type of municipal bond. So general obligation bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the issuer. Now, what does that specifically mean? Well, typically the issuer has the power to tax its citizens. Let's say it's a county, it's a city. It has some ability to levy a tax, for example, a property tax, in order to service the debt, to pay the interest, to repay the face value at maturity of the bonds. And so basically, this municipality, this county, this city, they're saying, look, we will tax if necessary to raise the money to pay this debt. And that's in contrast to a revenue bond, where they're instead saying with a revenue bond, they're saying, look, there's a specific revenue stream. For example, we're raising money to build a road, and then we're going to pay with the tolls that we get from that road. And if we don't get enough tolls, then we won't be able to pay you back. Sorry about that. General obligation bond is different. They're saying, look, we're not going to tie this to any specific revenue stream. We have the ability to tax or to raise money if necessary, and we will get you that money back. So it's a lot less risky than something like a revenue bond in terms of municipal bonds. So there are several different subtypes of general obligation bonds, and the strongest type is called unlimited tax. And the reason I say it's the strongest type is that basically with unlimited tax, you're saying that in theory, if this municipality has some problems, they have trouble servicing their debt, whatever, they will raise taxes to whatever is necessary. They will raise taxes to service the debt. So in theory, if they're having trouble coming up with the money to pay the interest, instead of property tax being 3% for the citizens, they'll say we're going to raise it to 5%. We have unlimited ability to tax our citizens in order to raise the money to service the debt. Now, in theory, obviously, it couldn't go to like 100%. People would be rioting in the streets. But the idea is that there's no limit on the amount that this municipality can raise taxes in order to service the debt. So that's stronger. That's a stronger promise to the investor who's buying this bond. Now, limited tax, on the other hand, is saying there's some kind of cap, right? So they might say, look, we'll raise it to 5%, but that's it. 5% is the cap, and if we have to raise to that, then we'll do that. But if we still aren't able to service the debt, then we're just not going to be able to make the payments. And so obviously that's less strong than the unlimited tax, where you can just raise it as much as you want. Now, with general fund, this subtype of general obligation bonds, you're not even saying, look, I'm promising you that I will raise taxes if necessary, right? So here, unlimited tax, you're saying I'll raise it whatever amount I need to pay the debt. Limited tax, you're saying I'll raise it, but only up to 5% or whatever the limit is. General fund is, you're making no promise to raise the tax whatsoever. So I'll just put no promise to raise tax. Now, that doesn't mean that this investor isn't going to get any money, or that the money isn't going to come from the property taxes. You're just saying, look, I'm just giving you a general claim, and we're going to try and pay your debt off. But there's no promises that we're going to raise tax on our citizens, right? It might be that there's a particular state law that says, for example, that they can't raise tax, right? So there might be a state law, for example, let's say Alabama or some state says, look, state law is that you can't raise property taxes in order to service the debt. So in that case, then the municipality really has no choice but to issue this kind of municipal bond. Now, when we think about guaranteed debt, so guaranteed debt is, we've kind of had some similarities here, right? Among these three, we had unlimited power to tax, a limited amount of tax with a cap, and then general fund saying we will make no promise about raising taxes. Guaranteed debt is a different animal in that what you're basically saying with guaranteed debt is you're saying, like, for example, the city of Scranton is going to say our city will guarantee the debt of the parking authority, right? So it's like one municipality is guaranteeing the debt of another municipal organization's debt, right? So they're basically guaranteeing the debt. It's almost like, I don't want to say co-signing on a loan, but they're basically guaranteeing the debt of another based on their own obligations. So basically, let's take Scranton. So let's say Scranton has its own muni bonds, right? They have their own general obligation bonds, but then they say, well, also we're going to guarantee the debt of the parking authority, right? The parking authority is raising money to build some new parking garage, and we're going to guarantee this debt, but that's separate from the municipal bonds that the city of Scranton has issued for itself. Now, there are a lot of different provisions that will go into these general obligation bonds that can affect the value. And one is, this is a very important one, is the first budget obligation. And the reason this is very important is that the first budget obligation basically says that the first priority in terms of the money that comes in for that municipality, for the city, or for the school district, first priority is to service the debt. So that means before people get paid, before anything, like this is the number one priority, that the debt is going to be paid. So it's not like you could say, you know what, we have to pay all these other claims here, we have to do this, and then if we have money left over, we'll give it to the debt holders, and the debt holders just have to eat that risk. Now, if there's a first budget obligation, then you have number one priority is you have to service that debt first. Now, with a continuing obligation, now, when you have that provision, what it basically is, if in case of like limited tax or the general fund that we talked about before, when you don't have the unlimited tax, you might not be able to service debt, right? So if you can't service the debt, we'll just say unserviced debt will carry forward to the future, right? So that means if you can't pay your interest on your debt this year, it'll carry forward, and then the investors can collect that money the next period. They can keep coming for it. So basically, even though you say, hey, look, we have limited tax, we can only raise taxes so much this year, and therefore we're not able to service all the debt, then this continuing obligation says, fine, the portion that you couldn't service is going to carry forward to the next period. Now, a statutory lien, now we're getting a little more complex in terms of provisions, but I just want to give you an idea. So a statutory lien is basically saying if you go or if the municipality goes bankrupt, then this muni bond is not going to be treated as unsecured debt, right? So unsecured debt is basically debt that doesn't have any kind of collateral behind it, right? So it wouldn't have priority normally in a bankruptcy proceeding. But when you have the statutory lien, you're saying, look, actually, this is not going to be treated as unsecured debt, so it's going to have a higher priority in terms of its claims in the bankruptcy proceeding. And that's going to be helpful, obviously, to investors. That's going to give them a little less risk. Now, a tax cap is going to actually be hurtful to investors, right? This is not going to be good. And when I'm talking about a tax cap, so I'm thinking like, for example, property taxes, it might be state law. Now, you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, we just talked about limited taxes or limited tax obligation type of general obligation bond. That had a cap, right? So didn't we already talk about this? Well, the limited tax obligation bond is just saying, look, we're imposing on this type of debt, we're saying we won't raise property tax to more than 5%. We're imposing that as part of the debt. However, a tax cap might be a different thing that we're talking about here. For example, the state might have a law that says, look, in no case can property taxes be more than 7%. Right? So, and that's just not even dealing with municipal bonds. That's just in general. Just a general state law. They're just saying that property taxes can only be so high in the state. And so if that's the case, then the bondholders, obviously, and the municipalities are bound to respect that. And so that's going to increase the risk, because then even if you have kind of, quote, unlimited tax obligation, well, there's this tax cap that's by state law. So then if there's some kind of issue, even though the municipality might technically have the unlimited ability to tax its citizens to raise money, however, if there's that state law that they're bound to respect, that they can only raise the property tax so much, then that's going to increase risk for the investors, because they might have a hard time getting their debt